Yo, Gazmus here with another Grand Archive video, and this time we are upgrading the Silvie starter deck. Before I get into this guide, I want to make it pretty clear that these changes aren't going to take Water Silvie to top of the meta, but will make this deck more consistent and give you a fighting chance. So as long as you are not chasing those gold event packs and are more than content with a participation award, let's get into it. As always, here's the deck list. A link can be found in the description below. But before I get into what cards come in and out, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Apparently it helps, but I require more subs and likes just to confirm this theory. Okay, so starting with the Wind Resonance Bauble and swapping that with the Grand Crusader Ring. This is pretty straightforward, going from conditional card draw to unconditional card draw. Next we swap out the Flute of Taming for Horn of Beast Calling. The reduction in cost of a beast can come in clutch in the late game, and the reason we get rid of a flute is, as you'll see later on, I've removed the higher level Pride allies, so you don't need to be at a high level to effectively play out this deck. The reason this flute is swapped out and not the other flute is due to the other's ability, but we'll get into that later. Like I just mentioned, we don't need high levels for Pride, so Seed of Nature and its ability to give up to 4 levels for the turn is redundant and can be cut from this deck. I have slotted in Guy's Blessing instead, as we have some ability to mill allies into the graveyard, but it also acts as a little insurance plan if the game isn't going our way and our units have been cleared from the board. Also, it has the added benefit of being activated outside of materialization, which is just awesome. The last one I changed from Regala is Beastbond Paws for Safeguard Amulet. Your worst matchup is Mages, so why not put in an additional non-attack damage prevention. The paws are super niche, only good against stealth units, which there aren't many running around currently. Now getting into the main board changes, I'll break down the cards I've taken out into a couple of categories. First, the high Pride allies like Virtus and Lakeside Serpent. Virtus is nearly impossible to turn Pride on for in this deck, and Serpent requires more of a mill package to really maximise. Also, another reason to not play Serpent is a lot of decks run Nullifying Lantern to counter some Rye and Lorraine builds, but this Lantern also shuts off Lakeside Serpent, and as Water can't deal with Regalia once on the field, when a Lantern comes out, it stays out, and our Power the Serpent is turned off for the rest of the game. The cards that give levels like Piper's Lullaby, Invoke Dominance and Empowering Harmony are no longer required and therefore can be cut, as our highest Pride card left in the deck is 5, which is much easier to get to. The other cards which I consider buff cards, being Trusty Steed and Meadowbloom Dryad, are just too slow and we have better options for that slot. So the first card that I've added to the deck is Dungeon Guide. It's played in nearly every deck and it's needed in this one to keep up with most decks in the meta. Dungeon Guide in Silvie can actually be played on Silvie level 1 to 2 and not only Silvie 2 to 3. The reason being is that Silvie's level 2 on Enter ability draws cards, so subsidizes the cards lost to Dungeon Guide. So if you have an animal and a beast on the field, it might be a play to go to level 2 using a Dungeon Guide, as the 2 cards banished will be returned, also preventing your opponent to mess with your board. The next card we run is Young Beastbonder. It's just a quicker Meadowbloom Dryad, and as it's normal, we can run it earlier in the game. Also, as it has floating memory, we're not concerned if it's destroyed, as we can leverage the floating memory with leveling up or getting a strong Regalia item. Hymn of Gaia's Grace is one of Terra's strongest cards, and it also pairs nicely with Arima Gaia's Wings. An Arima that you hymn out at the end of your opponent's turn will get the buff counters at the start of your next turn, which feels broken to be honest. Arima is a great beast that can recycle itself with its on death trigger, but once it has some buff counters it becomes super sticky and gets out of hand quickly. Lastly, my favourite water card, being Tide Diviner, is great as it helps dig through your deck. It can put floating memory in the graveyard, put extra animals and beasts in the graveyard, which turns down Guy's Blessing that we mentioned earlier. So now that we've discussed the ins and outs of this deck, let's discuss the playstyle of this deck. This deck follows a pretty simple game plan. You develop a board of chunky allies, and by chunky I mean allies with strong life stats. Then we use a 2-card combo to allow us to swing with those allies using their life stat instead of their attack stat. Anyone familiar with Magic the Gathering wall deck and swinging with big butts will get the concept of this deck. Okay, as you can see, our allies have relatively low attack stats, but they all have decent health stats, meaning they tend to have a bit more staying power. Also, allies like Dewdrop Hares and the Beastbonder tend to not be destroyed as they have floating memory, and this plays right into our plans. So when they don't clear the board, we punish them with a card called Mist Resonance, which reads, allies we control get +1 life. class bonus. If activated, a melody card this turn, allies we control assign damage with their life stat instead of power stat until end of turn. Now this card costs 5, so it's a 6 card hand at minimum to play. The cheapest melody card is a 1 cost, so you need 8 cards in hand to harmonize Mist Resonance. But we can get around that by using a Melodious Flute's Banish ability, which essentially makes Mist Resonance a harmony and a melody card, thus allowing us to play this with fewer cards in hand. So once we pull off this 1-2 combo, our measly looking 1-6 Giant Tortoise is now buffed to essentially being a 7-7, and that's a lot of damage. A board of 2 to 3 allies can easily push 10 plus damage and go a long way to ending games. You may have noticed that the deck list shown earlier doesn't have a sideboard. That's because that sideboard is totally up to you. This deck has a few weaknesses. It's susceptible to aggro decks, it struggles against mage decks. Therefore, it's on you to build the sideboard to counter the decks you are running into. If there's a lot of mages or Lorraines that are going tall, consider Water Barrier. If you want to be more aggressive or need to clear a board, consider Beastal Frenzy. But maybe you want an ally with an even bigger butt, then bring out my boy Opus and go ham. Whatever you need or want, go for it. This sideboard is where you get to experiment. Finally, before I wrap this one up, I'll go over some of the pitfalls I encountered when I was testing this deck. Losing allies before I could get the benefit of level 2 Silvie. This was usually due to overextending and not keeping a Song of Nurturing or a give buff in hand to maintain allies. Second is not playing around Lorraine's level 2. With this, I'm not saying don't play any allies because that hurts you in the long run. So where I found success is putting at least one ally, especially with floating memory, on the board, as this baits Lorraine into a level 2, so even though she gets a card draw, you get floating. Where I try to play the bull or wolf first, I tend to get punished by Lorraine's level up as I lose an ally and then I still need to burn a card to progress my game plan. And the last pitfall is not controlling the board. If possible, clear every ally an opponent puts out, even if it's floating memory. For example, the tortoise you play, it's pretty unlikely a Lorraine can get rid of on her own, but she can if it's aided by an ally. Don't be like me and leave a Flame Rune Swordsman alive and then it come back to bite you. Okay, so that's all for today. If you want to discuss the deck or have had success with a different Water Silvie build, let us know in the comments or find us in the GA Discord. The link will be in the description. Cheers.